Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're not just telling another myth. You're about to hear a secret the gods themselves would rather you never discover. This is the story of Hera, the queen of Olympus. To mortals, she was the goddess of marriage and family, honored with temples older than Zeus himself. But behind the crown, behind the hymns and offerings, there are shadows, dark secrets of betrayal, rage, and power struggles that Zeus desperately tried to hide. You see, Hera was never the willing bride. In one of the strangest myths ever whispered, Zeus tricked her into marriage, disguising himself as a weak, shivering cuckoo bird. And when Hera held it close, offering warmth, the bird transformed, and Zeus claimed her forever. What looked like love was in truth an ambush. And that moment, that theft of choice, planted the seed of vengeance. It is the root of every curse, every storm, every story of Hera's wrath that would echo through eternity. Tonight, we peel back the veil on those forgotten truths, the betrayals, the forbidden alliances, the secrets hidden in the garden of the Hesperides, and why Hera was far more dangerous, far more powerful than Zeus ever wanted you to believe. So settle in, dim the lights, and let Olympus whisper to you its most forbidden tale. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm creating here. And one more thing, drop a comment below with where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I love seeing our little community stretch across the world, connected in this very moment. In one of the oldest and strangest myths, Hera's marriage to Zeus began not with romance, but with deception. Long before Zeus claimed the throne of Olympus, Hera was worshipped in her own right. She had temples in Argos and Samos, and mortals honored her as a goddess of marriage and the sacred order of life. She was independent, radiant, and untouchable. And perhaps that was the problem. Zeus, ever ambitious, wanted Hera at his side, but he knew she would not easily yield. Hera was proud, perhaps too proud, to ever say yes to a king who demanded rather than asked. So Zeus devised a plan. Not a heroic conquest, but a trick. He transformed into a tiny cuckoo bird, trembling in the rain. Picture it, the great thunderer, master of storms, reduced to a soaked, helpless creature. When Hera came upon the poor bird, her heart stirred with pity. She lifted it carefully, pressed it against her chest to shield it from the storm. It was an act of compassion, of instinctive protection. But in that moment of tenderness, Zeus revealed himself. The bird vanished in a burst of divine light, and Hera found herself held in the arms of the god of thunder. It was no longer an innocent act of care. It was a trap. Hera, the proud goddess, had been outmaneuvered by deception. The gods whispered of what followed. Some said Hera, humiliated, agreed to marriage to preserve her honor. Others said Zeus forced the bond upon her, making her his queen against her will. But whichever version you believe, one truth remains. Hera's choice was stolen. And that theft planted the seed of her fury. The cuckoo bird became a symbol of betrayal, of a wound that would never heal. Every storm she sent, every curse she wove, carried the echo of that moment. The world would later call her jealous and cruel, but few remembered the beginning. Hera was never a willing bride.
Another myth tells a harsher tale. Hera was not tricked, but taken. In this version, Hera resisted Zeus openly. She had her own temples, her own worshippers, her own dignity. She did not want to be reduced to just the wife of Zeus. But Zeus, known for his temper and dominance, could not accept rejection. One day, consumed by desire and anger, Zeus seized Hera by force. Their union in this story was born out of violence, not love, and to hide the shame, to protect her image as the goddess of marriage, Hera agreed to a wedding that would sanctify what had begun in violation. The wedding was magnificent. Golden apples from the Hesperides were offered as symbols of eternal love. The fates tied their threads. The gods cheered. But beneath the splendor, Hera's silence spoke louder than the hymns. She had been forced into a role she had not chosen. This version paints Hera as even more tragic. Imagine the goddess who protects marriage is trapped in a union built on coercion. The goddess of fidelity is bound to the most unfaithful husband in myth. The queen of Olympus is crowned, but only after her freedom is stripped away. It is in this paradox that Hera's fury takes root. Every punishment she dealt, every curse she uttered, becomes not mere jealousy, but rebellion. She was fighting the only way she could from within the chains of marriage.
Yet not all myths cast Hera as victim. A rarer version suggests that Hera chose Zeus, but not out of affection. Here, Hera is not the deceived nor the forced, but the strategist. She saw that Zeus, despite his arrogance, was destined to rule the cosmos. By joining him, she could secure her position, ensuring that the realm of marriage, family, and law remained under her dominion. She agreed, but on conditions. Hera demanded to be queen, not consort. The golden apples of the Hesperides gifted at the wedding were more than symbols of love. They were tokens of her authority. Even Zeus had to respect that power. This choice gave her influence, temples, and worshippers across Greece. But it also chained her to betrayal after betrayal. Zeus was never faithful, and each affair stabbed at the dignity Hera had bargained to preserve. Her fury, then, was not mere jealousy, but the weapon of a queen who traded love for power, only to realize she had bound herself to pain. In this telling, Hera is not weak. She is cunning, pragmatic, and ambitious. But ambition, too, can be a prison. By choosing Zeus, She chose Olympus, and in doing so, she chose a life where vengeance became her constant companion. When most people think of Hera, they imagine her in Zeus's shadow, queen of Olympus, yet defined only by her husband. But peel back the layers of myth, and another picture emerges. Hera was not merely a wife. She was a sovereign goddess, with temples and cults so vast that in some places she eclipsed Zeus himself. Take Argos, for example. There, the great Heraion stood as one of the most magnificent temples in all of Greece. Pilgrims traveled for days to kneel before her altar, bringing offerings of cattle, gold, and garlands of flowers. In Argos, Hera was not the companion of Zeus. She was the supreme deity, protector of the city, the one whose blessing ensured prosperity and order. On the island of Samos, her power was even striking. The Heraion of Samos, vast and ancient, was said to be so grand that even the temples of Zeus could not compare. The cult of Hera here was older than many Olympian tales. Priests and priestesses conducted elaborate ceremonies, honoring Hera as the mother of gods and mortals alike. For the people of Samos, Zeus was important, but Hera was eternal. This is the hidden truth of her crown. Hera's authority did not depend on her marriage. Her influence stretched across the Aegean, tied not to Zeus's thunder, but to the bonds of family, law, and fertility that mortals lived and died by. Even Zeus, for all his power, could not erase this. He might be king of the gods, but Hera was queen of society. Her cult shaped how humans understood family, fidelity, and the sanctity of vows. And in a world where promises held divine weight, that was a power no lightning bolt could destroy. So when you think of Hera, do not see only the jealous queen. See the goddess before the crown, the one worshipped by cities, the one whose name was spoken with reverence long before Zeus's throne was secure. For beneath the myths of anger lies a deeper truth. Hera's power was older, quieter, and in some places, greater than Zeus himself. Not all power is seen on thrones or temples. Some power works in whispers, in circles hidden from the eyes of kings. Hera, for all her grandeur, understood this better than anyone. Behind the ceremonies and the golden crown, Hera maintained what many poets never sang about: a council of loyal attendants, nymphs, minor goddesses, and priestesses devoted to her cause. To mortals, they seemed like simple handmaidens or singers at her altars, but in truth, they formed a secret web of influence, carrying Hera's voice across Olympus and down to the mortal world. These women and spirits advised her, comforted her, and at times conspired with her. It is said that when Hera plotted against Zeus, when she sought to bind him with chains of gold, it was not done alone. Her council whispered strategies, brought her news of Zeus's affairs, and encouraged her to act. They were the shadows behind the queen, strengthening her resolve. One tale even speaks of Hera meeting her council in hidden groves, far from Zeus's thunderous presence. By moonlight, she would speak of justice, of betrayal, of the need to remind Olympus that she was no silent partner. Each nymph, each goddess would swear loyalty, not just to Hera as wife of Zeus, but to Hera as sovereign, as the embodiment of order itself. Why does this matter? Because it reveals a truth that Zeus feared. His power came from open displays, storms, lightning, the roar of authority. Hera's power came from networks, from alliances, from a quiet unity among those overlooked. Where Zeus ruled with fear, Hera ruled with bonds of trust. And perhaps that is why her wrath was so enduring. She was never truly alone. Every time she punished a rival, every time she struck at Zeus's lovers, her council stood behind her, ensuring the act would echo, ensuring her anger became legend. This is the secret face of Hera's crown. It was not just a symbol of her marriage, but the mark of a leader surrounded by voices who believed in her. A queen not of storms, but of whispers. And whispers, when shared across generations, can shape destiny just as much as thunder.
Every queen has her symbols, and for Hera, none was more potent than the golden apples of the Hesperides. To most mortals, they were tokens of love, wedding gifts presented when she became the bride of Zeus. But beneath the golden glow, these apples carried a power far greater than romance. The story begins in the fabled garden of the Hesperides, a paradise hidden at the edge of the world. Guarded by nymphs and by Ladon, a serpent with 100 heads, the garden was Hera's domain alone. The apples that grew there were said to grant immortality, but more importantly, they represented Hera's sovereignty. Unlike Zeus's thunderbolts, which were instruments of destruction, Hera's apples embodied life, continuity, and the divine order of vows. When the gods gathered for her wedding, Gaia, the earth herself, presented Hera with these apples. It was not just a gift, it was a declaration that Hera's power would be tied to the eternal cycles of life, a counterbalance to Zeus's violent storms. Some whispered that even Zeus feared the apples, for they gave Hera leverage. While Zeus could strike fear, Hera could promise eternity. This symbolism became all the more dangerous during the Trojan War. Eris, the goddess of strife, threw a golden apple among the goddesses, sparking a rivalry that would set fire to the world. But few recall, the apple of discord was a twisted echo of Hera's own sacred fruit. What was once a sign of divine authority became a weapon of chaos. And Hera, once its guardian, was forced to fight for recognition all over again. Why does this matter? Because the apples reveal Hera's true strength. They show that her power was not simply borrowed from Zeus, but rooted in something deeper: fertility, legacy, the eternal bonds of promise, the kind of power that no thunderbolt could destroy. To mortals, Zeus was the king who ruled the sky, but to those who knew the secrets of Olympus, Hera was the queen who held the keys to eternity, and her apples were the proof. Even kings can be challenged. Even gods can be chained. There is a story, rarely told in full, about the day Hera rose against Zeus. She was not alone. With her stood Poseidon, lord of the sea, and Athena, goddess of wisdom and war. Together they wove a plan to humble the thunderer. Zeus, in his arrogance, had ruled Olympus with an iron hand. His storms shook the earth, his commands brooked no refusal. Hera, weary of humiliation and betrayal, gathered her allies. She whispered to Poseidon, reminding him how often Zeus dismissed the oceans. She spoke to Athena, pointing out that wisdom itself was stifled under Zeus's temper. Slowly, carefully, she built the coalition. The night came. While Zeus slept, the conspirators moved. Chains of gold, forged by Hephaestus, were brought forth. They bound Zeus hand and foot, silencing his thunder, dimming the sky. For the first time, the king of gods was a prisoner. The other Olympians watched in awe. Some whispered in fear, others in secret delight. Hera stood over Zeus, not with joy, but with grim satisfaction. At last, the balance had shifted. For a moment, she was not the queen in her husband's shadow. She was the ruler who dared to challenge the storm. But revolts rarely end as they begin. Thetis, the sea nymph destined to mother Achilles, brought word to Briareus, the 100-handed giant. Loyal to Zeus, Briareus stormed Olympus and shattered the chains. Zeus was freed, his fury greater than the storm itself. The rebellion failed, but its memory lingered, etched into the very stones of Olympus. For a brief, shining night, Hera and her allies had proved that even Zeus could fall.
Rebellions do not pass without consequence. When Zeus broke free from the golden chains, his fury was like a storm without end. The sky darkened, the earth shook, and the halls of Olympus trembled with the wrath of its king. And Hera, the instigator, bore the brunt of it. Zeus could not simply forgive. To pardon would mean weakness, and weakness was something the ruler of Olympus could never afford. So he made an example of Hera. In one of the cruelest punishments ever told in myth, Zeus bound her wrists with unbreakable chains and hung her high above the heavens. There she dangled, suspended between sky and earth, visible to gods and mortals alike. The wind whipped against her face,
The golden chains cut into her skin, and the shame was greater than any physical pain. For the goddess of marriage, the queen of Olympus, to be displayed like a criminal, it was a humiliation beyond words. The other gods looked on in silence. Some pitied her, some feared to intervene. Even Poseidon and Athena, her co-conspirators, could do nothing. To act again would mean war against Zeus, and none dared push the storm further. Hera remained alone, her pride shattered, but her resolve hardening with each passing hour. According to some versions, it was her son Hephaestus who felt her suffering most. The lame god of the forge, himself once cast down by Hera, now pitied her plight. In one tale, he tried to free her, but was driven back by Zeus's thunder. In another, he forged the chains himself, forced by his father's command, weeping as the hammer fell. This punishment lasted not days, but seasons, until finally Zeus released Hera. Some say because her cries moved the hearts of the other gods. Others say because Zeus realized that even in chains, Hera's spirit could not be broken. But the lesson was clear. Rebellion would be met with shame. And Hera carried that shame like a scar. From that day forward, her vengeance grew sharper, her plots more subtle. She had learned that defiance brought punishment, but also that punishment could not kill her resolve. Humiliation turned her from open challenger into hidden strategist. If she could not topple Zeus by force, she would strike him through whispers, through his lovers, through his children. The chains had bound her body, but they had also sharpened her mind.
Chains may break, but their memory never fades. Hera's rebellion failed, and her punishment scarred her pride. Yet from those scars she forged something new, a strategy of patience, subtlety, and quiet vengeance. No longer would she openly bind Zeus with chains. No longer would she risk the humiliation of direct revolt. Instead, Hera turned to weapons far sharper than iron: her wit, her cunning, her relentless influence. From that point on, Hera became the queen of hidden wars. She struck not at Zeus himself, but at the lives that wounded her most, his lovers and his illegitimate children. Each act of vengeance was not merely jealousy, as mortals often claimed, but a reminder to Zeus that she had not forgotten. Semele burned in lightning. Leto was hounded across the world. Heracles faced trials that nearly broke even a demigod. All because Hera, though chained once, refused to be powerless again. And yet this too was power. Hera learned to weave storms of circumstance, to bend fate itself. She could not overthrow Zeus, but she could shape the lives of those around him. In many ways, she became a mirror to Zeus. He ruled with open thunder, she ruled with silent persistence,
One shouted, the other whispered. Both reshaped the world. This was the legacy of her rebellion. The chains may have silenced her body, but they awakened her mind. From humiliation, Hera carved a new throne, not of gold, but of strategy. And in this throne she endured, outlasting scandals, betrayals, and even the centuries of mortal worship that painted her as cruel. For in truth, Hera was not only cruel, she was calculating. She was enduring. She was the goddess who had once dared to topple the king of Olympus, and who, after tasting defeat, discovered a subtler way to rule. And perhaps in the end, that is why her story remains so haunting. Hera's rebellion was crushed, but her spirit was never conquered.
Of all Hera's enemies, none bore her wrath more constantly than Heracles. His very name means the glory of Hera, but the irony was bitter. He was not born of Hera, but of Alcmene, a mortal woman seduced by Zeus. For Hera, Heracles was not just another child of betrayal. He was the insult carved deepest into her heart. From the moment of his birth, Hera sought to destroy him. When Alcmene was in labor, Hera delayed the birth by tricking the goddess of childbirth, nearly killing both mother and son. When that failed, she sent 2 serpents slithering into the infant's cradle. But Heracles, even as a baby, strangled the snakes with his bare hands. Yet Hera did not relent. As Heracles grew, so did her hatred. She plagued his life with madness, driving him to slay his own wife and children in a fit of frenzy. This crime forced him into the service of King Eurystheus, where he was tasked with the 12 labors, ordeals so dangerous they should have killed him. Hera's hand guided many of these trials: the Hydra, the Stymphalian birds, the Amazons, the cattle of Geryon. But here lies the paradox. Every trap, every punishment Hera set only made Heracles greater. The more she opposed him, the more his legend grew. Mortals sang of his strength, his courage, his endurance. In trying to erase him, Hera immortalized him. Some poets even suggest that Hera's wrath was a twisted kind of love, a recognition that Heracles embodied the strength of Zeus, the very thing she despised, yet could never destroy. And in the end, when Heracles ascended to Olympus, Hera was forced to reconcile. She gave him her daughter Hebe as a bribe, binding her enemy into her family at last. But the scars remained. To Hera, Heracles was not just a demigod. He was the living reminder of the cuckoo's trick, of the chains, of every betrayal Zeus ever inflicted. And so long as he lived, her vengeance burned with him. If Heracles was Hera's greatest obsession, Semele was her cruelest victim. Semele, a mortal princess of Thebes, caught the wandering eye of Zeus. Their secret union soon bore fruit. She became pregnant with his child. But nothing enraged Hera more than the thought of another mortal carrying Zeus's blood. Unlike other rivals, Hera chose deception, the weapon she had once suffered herself. Cloaked in disguise, Hera visited Semele, whispering doubts into her ear. "If Zeus is truly your lover," she said sweetly, "should he not reveal himself in all his divine glory?" The seed of suspicion took root. When Zeus next came to her, Semele, urged by Hera's poisoned words, demanded proof. Bound by an oath on the river Styx, Zeus could not refuse. He revealed himself in his full splendor, thunder, lightning, and divine fire. No mortal could withstand such glory. Semele's body was consumed in flames, her mortal frame reduced to ash. But the child within her survived. Zeus, in a desperate act, sewed the unborn Dionysus into his thigh until he was ready to be born. Thus the god of wine and ecstasy entered the world, not from his mother's womb, but from the body of his father. Hera's vengeance did not end there. Even after Dionysus was born, she hounded him with madness, sending him wandering across the earth. In some tales, she incited kings and mortals to scorn him, forcing Dionysus to prove himself again and again. Yet every attempt to erase him only spread his cult further, until he became one of the most beloved gods of Greece. This is the irony of Hera's wrath. In trying to destroy, she often created. Her vengeance against Semele gave birth to a god who represented freedom, ecstasy, and the breaking of boundaries, the very opposite of Hera's own domain of marriage and order. It was as if fate itself mocked her. And yet, Semele's death remained a warning. To defy Hera, to steal the loyalty of Zeus, was to invite ruin by fire. Her name lived on not through worship, but through tragedy, etched forever in the thunder that ended her life.
If Semele's tragedy was fire, Leto's was exile. Hera's vengeance pursued her not with lightning, but with relentless denial of sanctuary. Leto, a titaness and one-time lover of Zeus, carried within her womb 2 children destined for greatness, Apollo and Artemis. Yet Hera, consumed with rage, swore that no land beneath the sun would receive her rival. Wherever Leto wandered, she found doors barred, temples closed, earth itself trembling in refusal. No city dared defy the Queen of Olympus. Desperate, Leto roamed across Greece and beyond, hounded like a fugitive. Some myths tell that even animals turned against her, driven by Hera's curse. When Leto begged for rest, lakes dried up, islands rejected her, mountains shook her off. Her suffering became a pilgrimage of humiliation, her swollen belly heavy with the weight of divine wrath. Finally, after endless wandering, she came upon a drifting island, Delos. It was a place so barren, so unstable, that Hera had not thought to curse it. Delos, out of compassion, allowed Leto to rest. There, after 9 days of labor, she brought forth Artemis, and soon after, Apollo. The twins would become 2 of the most powerful gods of Olympus, guardians of light and prophecy. But Hera's vengeance did not end with their birth. Even after Apollo grew into the god of the sun and Artemis became mistress of the hunt, Hera's shadow lingered. She opposed their temples, challenged their sanctuaries, and in some tales sent monstrous beings to test them. Yet like Heracles and Dionysus, the very struggle against Hera made the twins stronger. Their myths shine with resilience born of persecution. The irony is stark. Hera, goddess of marriage and motherhood, turned childbirth itself into a battlefield. Leto's pain was not just personal, it was cosmic, a reminder that even the womb was not safe from Hera's fury. And yet the children survived, not in spite of Hera, but partly because of her. The harshness of their beginnings shaped their divine authority. To this day, the island of Delos stands as both a sanctuary and a warning. It is the place where Hera's vengeance was outwitted, where exile birthed divinity. Mortals who prayed there whispered both gratitude to Leto and fear of Hera, for they knew the truth. To cross the queen of Olympus was to invite endless wandering, endless sorrow.
Not every marriage begins with roses. Hera's did not. But among the few treasures that softened the bitterness of her union with Zeus was a gift unlike any other, a garden at the edge of the world. When Gaia, the primordial earth, attended Hera's wedding, she did not come with jewels or thrones. Instead, she offered something more enduring, a living sanctuary. At the borders of the sunset, where the sea kissed the horizon, Gaia planted a grove that shimmered with eternal twilight. This was the garden of the Hesperides, a paradise no mortal could reach, a secret that belonged to Hera alone. In its center grew trees that bore golden apples. Their light did not fade with seasons. Their skin gleamed as if the sun itself had been trapped inside. To the poets, these apples symbolized immortality. To the priests, they were proof that Hera's authority was rooted not in Zeus's thunder, but in the cycles of life and eternity that even kings could not control. Here, Hera had something Zeus could never seize. His storms could topple mountains, his lightning could shatter cities, but he could not command the eternal fruit. The apples remained hers, tokens of sovereignty bestowed by the earth itself. Some whispered that Hera visited the garden often, walking beneath the twilight boughs, breathing the eternal fragrance of blossoms. There, away from Zeus and Olympus, she was not wife or queen. She was sovereign, whole, unchained. In the garden, she remembered who she had been before the cuckoo's trick and before the chains. And perhaps that was Gaia's true intention. The earth, ancient and wise, knew that Hera would need her own power to endure the storms of Zeus. The garden was not just a gift, it was a safeguard, a promise that somewhere in the cosmos, Hera's authority was absolute. Thus, the Garden of the Hesperides became more than a myth. It became Hera's hidden crown, the one that glowed not in Olympus's halls, but in the eternal twilight at the edge of the world. Every treasure demands a guardian, and for Hera's golden apples,
no ordinary sentinel would suffice. The Garden of the Hesperides was not merely planted, it was fortified. The first guardians were the Hesperides themselves, daughters of Night or of the Titan Atlas, depending on the tale. They were maidens of twilight, their voices like music carried on the evening breeze. To mortals, they seemed harmless, enchanting even. But they had one sacred duty: to guard Hera's orchard, to ensure that no apple was plucked without her blessing. Each Hesperid represented a shade of dusk: Agli, the radiance of the setting sun; Eurythea, the red glow of twilight; and Hesperia, the star of the evening. They were symbols as much as sentinels, reminders that the apples were not fruit of day or night, but of eternity. But Hera knew beauty alone could not defend eternity, and so she set beside them a beast that defied gods and mortals alike: Ladon, the serpent dragon with 100 heads. Coiled around the golden trees, each head kept watch in a different direction, tongues flickering, eyes unblinking. No thief could approach unseen, no hand could stretch without meeting venom. Ladon was more than a monster. He was Hera's warning to the cosmos. Some gifts cannot be stolen. Some powers cannot be seized. To reach the apples, one would have to face not just a beast, but Hera's will itself. The presence of Ladon and the Hesperides gave the garden an aura of both paradise and dread. To some, it was a sanctuary of eternal twilight, where laughter and song filled the air. To others, it was a prison of beauty, where even a single step too far could end in death. Such was the duality of Hera's power: nurturing and destructive, gentle and merciless. And yet, tales of the garden's guardians only made it more alluring. Heroes whispered of the apples, of immortality, of glory. Poets sang of maidens whose songs lured even gods. But always, at the edge of those stories, loomed the coils of Ladon, the ever-watchful. In time, the garden became a symbol not only of Hera's sovereignty, but of the cost of ambition. For the apples promised eternity, but the guardians promised ruin. It was the perfect balance of Hera's domain: rewards wrapped in peril, vows guarded by fear. And so the Garden of the Hesperides was never just a gift. It was a fortress, a crown with fangs, a paradise where beauty and terror lived side by side, all in Hera's name.
What makes an apple worth a war? For mortals, it is hunger. For gods, it is pride. The golden apples of the Hesperides were more than fruit. They were symbols of eternity, of divine authority, of promises that could not be broken. Hera guarded them fiercely, knowing that whoever claimed them could claim power itself. And yet, the apples did not remain locked in paradise forever. The first to test Hera's orchard was none other than Heracles during his 11th labor.
Tasked with retrieving the apples, he ventured to the edge of the world. Some say he tricked Atlas into fetching them for him, others that he faced laden himself. In both versions, the act was audacious. To touch Hera's sacred fruit was to trespass on her sovereignty. Though Heracles returned the apples, their theft showed that even Hera's fortress could be breached. But the most famous story of the apples came not from a labor, but from discord. Eris, goddess of strife, once cast a golden apple into a wedding feast of the gods. On it was inscribed, "To the fairest." Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each claimed it, and Zeus, unwilling to judge, sent the choice to Paris of Troy. His decision to award the apple to Aphrodite ignited passions that led to the Trojan War. Here lies the cruel twist of fate. An apple once given to Hera as a wedding gift, a symbol of her dignity, became the instrument of betrayal and bloodshed. The apple of the Hesperides had become the apple of discord, transforming Hera's sanctuary into the spark of the greatest war of myth. Yet even in this, Hera's presence was felt. She did not forget that the apple was hers by right. During the Trojan War, she sided fiercely with the Greeks, opposing Paris and the Trojans at every turn. To Hera, the war was not only about honor or politics, it was about reclaiming what had been stolen, about reminding the world that her symbols were not to be mocked. The apples of the Hesperides thus carried a paradox. They were gifts of life, yet they inspired death. They were symbols of love, yet they sowed hatred. They were promises of eternity, yet they provoked wars that reshaped the world. In guarding the apples, Hera guarded not just fruit, but the fragile balance between creation and destruction. And when mortals and gods alike reached for them, they revealed the truth that eternity itself can be both a blessing and a curse.
In the halls of Olympus, Zeus's thunder shook the pillars, Poseidon's trident stirred the seas, and Apollo's lyre filled the air with song. Yet through it all, another figure stood, quiet, regal, watching. Hera, the queen of the gods, was never the loudest voice. She did not need to be. Her silence was not weakness. It was the silence of calculation, of power, measured not by noise, but by endurance. For every betrayal Zeus flaunted, Hera endured. For every slight, she remembered. For every wound, she stored a weapon. She became a queen not by thunder, but by survival. The myths often show her as jealous, bitter, cruel. But these tales forget that Hera had been stripped of choice. Her marriage began in trickery or force, depending on the telling. Her dignity was tested, her crown mocked, and yet she remained, not as a victim, but as the immovable presence beside the king. And the temples of Argos, Samos, and Olympia remind us that mortals did not see Hera only as a jealous wife. They saw her as the protector of vows, the guarantor of family, the goddess whose gaze could stabilize the fragile order of society. And in that silence, Hera's true power whispered that endurance is its own kind of strength, and survival its own form of rule.
Every king casts a shadow, and for Zeus, that shadow was Hera. She was not simply the queen at his side. She was the presence that followed him, the reminder that no betrayal would go unanswered, no injustice forgotten. Her vengeance was legendary, yet often misunderstood. Mortals told stories of her tormenting Zeus's lovers and his children, painting her as jealous, bitter, cruel. But Hera's fury was not born from pettiness. It was born from wounds that never healed. She had been deceived at her wedding, chained in humiliation, mocked by Zeus's infidelities. Her wrath was not merely a reaction, it was survival, a way to claw back dignity in a world where even goddesses could be powerless. Semele, Leto, Alcmene, each bore the cost of Hera's rage. Their suffering was real, their tragedies written into myth. But beneath those tales lies another truth. Hera's vengeance was not blind. It was aimed precisely at the cracks in Zeus's pride, at the vulnerabilities he created through his own excesses. She struck where it hurt him most, not at his throne, but at his legacy. Heracles endured 12 impossible labors. Dionysus wandered in madness. Apollo and Artemis were born only after their mother fled across the earth. In each of these stories, Hera's shadow looms, not just as punishment, but as reminder. Zeus was not untouchable. Even the king of gods lived under the watchful eyes of his queen. This shadow was eternal, not because Hera never forgave, but because Zeus never changed. With every new betrayal, her wrath rekindled. With every new child, her scars deepened. To mortals, it seemed endless cruelty. To Hera, it was endless resistance. And perhaps that is why her story endures. She was not the goddess of mercy, nor of forgetfulness. She was the goddess who remembered, the one who carried pain not as weakness, but as fire, the one whose vengeance stretched beyond lifetimes, reminding both gods and mortals that betrayal, once sown, never truly dies. Hera's shadow was not absence, it was presence, unyielding, eternal, inevitable, the darker half of Olympus's crown. What remains when the thunder fades, when the fires of jealousy dim, when the wars of gods become dust in memory? What is left of Hera? Her legacy is paradox. To some, she is the cruelest of goddesses, the embodiment of jealousy and vengeance. To others,
She is the protector of vows, the guardian of families, the queen whose gaze sanctified marriage itself. Both images are true, for Hera was never simple. She was power and pain, dignity and fury, victim and sovereign. The myths tried to box her into roles: jealous wife, bitter queen, but Hera refused to remain small. Every act of vengeance, every whisper of wrath, was also a declaration that she would not be erased, not by Zeus, not by poets, not by time. In temples across Greece, mortals prayed to her not in fear of her jealousy, but in hope of her blessing. Couples sought her favor before marriage. Cities dedicated festivals to her, celebrating as the divine stabilizer of society. Her shadow may have loomed dark over Olympus, but to mortals, she was light, a reminder that promises mattered, that loyalty bound heaven and earth alike. Yet the darker part of her legacy cannot be ignored. Her wrath scarred heroes, ended lives, and twisted destinies. Children like Heracles carried her fury like a curse. Women like Leto and Semele bore her hatred in their flesh. Through them, Hera became the eternal reminder that power, once wounded, can wound in return. But perhaps this is what makes her story endure. Hera was not perfect, not merciful, not gentle. She was real. Her contradictions reflect the human heart: love entangled with anger, loyalty poisoned by betrayal, endurance shadowed by resentment. She was the goddess who could never be reduced to a single word. Even now, when we speak of her, it is not only as the wife of Zeus, but as Hera herself, queen, avenger, protector, shadow. Her silence was power. Her vengeance was memory. Her endurance was eternity. And so Hera remains, in myths told by firelight, in temples crumbled to stone, in the quiet prayers of those who fear betrayal. She lingers as the eternal shadow on Olympus, the queen who was never conquered, the goddess whose scars became her crown.